McCracken on location in McCrackin's Corner with Murray Weiner. How are you doing today, Murray?
How are you? Good to see you.
Oh, you too as well.
As always.
So you're a big promoter of musical events. What got you involved in that originally?
When I was 21 in like 1965, and there were a lot of bands around Chicago then forming. You know, all the bands you see now.
Did they have a lot of festivals at that time?
No, there really weren't, but there were a lot of the bands that you see now on this like cornerstones of rocking that were forming in Chicago.
Sure.
You know, the Shadows of Night and the Crying Shames and the Buckinghams and the Eyes of March. So I was old enough at that time to start actually going and seeing those bands.
So originally you went as a spectator to go see the shows?
Yeah, and I ended up developing friendships with some of those people. So that was my first real like introduction to the music scene of Chicago.
So it was at 21 you said?
Yeah, 1965.
So were you out of college then, or did you go to college? Or?
Yeah, I actually started college in 1962, and then I dropped out and I became like a hippie, I guess you would call it, and then went back to school like in 1967.
Okay.
Which
for business or music or?
Actually, I wanted to be a writer.
Okay.
And I had a minor like in criminal justice of all things. I was very, very into that whole hippie, help your fellow man type of thing, you know.
Okay.
But I always had a love for music. In 1967, my parents had a fellow who was living next door to them and his mother. And he was working at a club and asked me, I was visiting one day, he said, hey, we're looking for people to work there. How would you like to maybe work there? I said, well, that'd be fun. And so I went there and started working at this place. It was called the Club Laurel. The guys who owned the place, at that time they were booking like a lot of what they called show bands, which was kind of like these bands that did a variety of stuff and danced, and they were basically looking to, you know, start to do more local types of things.
Okay. So this was a club that you worked at where they brought talent in and performed on the stage.
They wanted to kind of like bring in like more local talent, since this whole scene in Chicago was kind of burgeoning with all these bands starting up. They were looking to get somebody in there that was fresh. Said, do you know of anybody? I said, well, there's this kind of band that's just recently formed back in February, and it's really kind of exciting what they're doing. Maybe October of 1967. And they've only played about 5 gigs.
And what band you're speaking of?
Well, it ended up that band was the CTA.
Oh, CTA, okay.
Which later went on to become Chicago.
Okay.
So basically the first band I ever really took part in booking at all or having anything to do with was the CTA. In fact, we had them, I remember, from November 1st to November 5th of 1967 for 5 nights as like the house band.
So when you started booking, how did you go about it? Just started making phone calls, or? Yeah,
I just called around and said, hey, that, you know, they're looking for a house band for a week, and you guys want to do it. And then in fact they came back in February of 1968 for another 5 days, and then left for California, and then kind of the rest is history.
So how did your progression in your esteemed field?
So what happened was that after that, I went back to school, and I became the editor of the newspaper. At that time it was called Chicago Teachers College, which is now Northeastern Illinois. I started a music series there, which we used to call like nooners. They were like noontime concerts that they'd have in the cafeteria. So I started booking bands in there, and I did that at the school.
Were they just from the school? Or
no, these were like local bands.
Oh, local bands from all around. Okay.
Right. And that kind of took me into like the 70s. I was also working in these residential treatment centers for delinquent kids. trying to expose them to music. In the early 70s, I got a job working with the state as a parole agent, like a parole officer.
Were you still doing your
music.
passion for music at the time too?
Yeah, exactly. Started to bring bands into the jail and the prisons for the inmates. What really got me excited about it was in around 1974. I was at a conference in Milwaukee as part of my parole job, and staying at the same hotel were the Doobie Brothers, and they were first starting to really break.
Okay.
I met one of the guys from the band, and we became very friendly. A guy named John Hartman was one of the original drummers of the Doobie Brothers. They had two drummers. Hartman thought that with my interest in music, and he invited me to go on the road, so to speak, on their Midwestern dates, so that I could learn more about the business part of it, which I did, and it helped me immensely. And then around the same period in '76, I befriended a guy from Canada, a singer-songwriter who went on to become very famous as well, a guy named Gino Vanelli, and we remain friends to this day. And I asked him the same thing, if I can I come to your Midwestern dates and hang out and see what it's like on the road? And he said, yeah, and I did that.
So were you still entertaining a full-time job at that time and doing this, or were you starting to switch over to?
No, still working, and I did the parole job till 1981.
Okay.
And in '79, I knew a guy who opened a small little nightclub on the far northeast side of the city. It was called Harvey's on Broadway, and he asked me if I wanted to book the bands in there. So I started booking bands in there and ended up actually managing a bunch of bands. I gave up the parole job, and then I just did music.
When did you come up with your name for your booking company?
I actually formalized Entertainment Management Group in 1986.
Also a couple of years after that.
And at that time I had already managed maybe 3 or 4 bands in town that became somewhat successful, played at all the major venues, headlined at the Park West. And
so by this time the word's really getting out about your company.
Yeah, I was starting to kind of establish myself. And at that point I was basically in it for almost 20 years. In '86, I started doing it full time, and with the emphasis not being on managing bands as much as starting to be like a promoter. Because I basically woke up one day and said, well, there's probably no difference in dealing with a $500 band as a $5,000 band or a $50,000 band, except it's just more attention to detail, but the principle was the same.
So you decided to switch over from managing bands to promotions?
To promotion, and I started doing...
What time around? What era was it?
That was kind of in probably 86, 87.
86, 87.
Got really a big break. The early 90s, where the people from Alexi Brothers Hospital had every year they did a big ball, like a black tie event. It's called the Garden Ball. And they asked me if I could help them secure some national talent for this ball. I did that and ended up booking people like Donald O'Connor and Debbie Reynolds and Bob Hope and Rich Little and the Letterman, all the people that were doing corporate things like that. My focus became corporate. Then when 9/11 came, that kind of changed everything. Because with the ban on people flying and things like that, you couldn't get entertainers to be able to get into town.
Oh, sure.
So it really put a damper on a lot of the corporate business for a lot of reasons. That started to go away, not only for me, but for other people that were in the business. And it was like in '91, I was approached by people that ran the Elk Grove Rotary Fest. And I was referred to them by the people at Alexian Brothers Hospital, which are also in Elk Grove. And the Elk Grove Rotary Fest was the first festival that I actually booked.
When was that?
1992.
Oh, 92, okay.
I think next year will be like the 27th year.
Yeah, I've been doing a couple of them. And, quite frankly, he does a wonderful job, I might add.
Yeah, and then after that, the focus just was, for the most part, on festivals, and we kind of branched out a little bit into the corporate sector, but in a different kind of way, and that was by securing speakers to come in and speak at their corporate functions or their national sales meetings, and also like to secure celebrity sports figures, to do autograph signings and things like that.
Let me ask you a question now. So when you first started booking the festivals in the summer, is that just booking the talent, or are you booking all the stage equipment and the sound, and what's involved in that for you?
Well, it happens both ways. Some festivals want you to secure the entertainment, and some want you to handle the whole thing, in which case I subcontract out like the sound and the lights and the staging to people that I've trusted.
You're general contracting the job at that point. Then, if they want to put it all in your lap, you say, well, you're just gonna part it out to the people that are experts in that field.
Yeah, and sometimes what they'll do is say, well, we want to take care of the production part of it on our own and just have you get the entertainment, which is not my preference, because as a promoter, I want to make sure that the talent that I'm supplying has the proper production for what they
So that was my next question, was if you promote a world-class band, which you have, world-class talent, do they have requirements for the stage or the sound that has to be, otherwise they're not going to perform?
When you start working with national caliber
so then
acts,
you have to be able to work within the rest of the group.
Yeah, their riders are very specific as to what they would like to have. Of course, everything's negotiable.
I mean, is it a deal breaker if they don't?
Well, some things are. I mean, in some of these riders, it will actually say we must have this, or it's a deal breaker.
Okay.
But most of those riders are universal in that they are written to basically apply to every type of setting. So, in other words, if a band were going in to play the All-State Arena, they have a rider for that, and it's probably the same rider that I'm going to get. So obviously for what I'm doing, most likely I don't need the same amount of lights as you would for something like that or whatever. So a lot of that is negotiable, but in the end, it has to be basically within the purview of what they're asking for.
You're promoting the talent to come in, and you're not responsible for the stage and the lighting and the sound. Do you have to negotiate that with those people, or the people that are having you promote the talent have to deal with that?
Usually in a situation where you're dealing with a national act, you let the client know that it's in their best interest for the promoter to have control over all of that, to make sure that everything is right. In an instance where that's not the case, then there's a lot of logistical meetings that have to go on between the promoter and the people providing the production to make sure that everybody's on the same page, so there's no surprises.
I see.
Because these bands, if they show up and it is not right, they will not play.